This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and today we have a model A71 talking book record player from 1971. These were loaned out or given to the blind, visually impaired, and physically handicapped individuals who can't conveniently read standard printed material. And this was part of the Library of Congress talking book program. This one works, but it needs the usual mechanical overhaul in order for it to work its best and to continue working, so we're going to take care of that in just a few minutes. This particular unit plays talking book records at either 8 RPM, 16 RPM, or 33 RPM, and we have a neutral position which your speed selector should be kept in when not in use to preserve the idler wheel. As you can hear, that platter bearing needs some lubrication in the worst kind of way. Here's our idler wheel, and you can tell it also needs some lubrication. Now, if you're wondering why this video is so choppy, I've been having some problems with the YouTube uploader since Windows Movie Maker 2012 or whatever it is won't work with my computer. It's some sort of video card compatibility issue, so I'm having to use the YouTube uploader. And it seems like any segment that I try to upload that's longer than, say, 1 minute and 45 seconds, it'll get to the end of the processing stage, and then it will jump up and say upload aborted or upload failed or whatever it says. It all means the same thing, but anyway, that usually equates to me pitching a fit and cussing, so we're going to try this little experiment. We'll just try to upload many short segments and maybe they'll all go through. Here's the underside of the unit. They give you a schematic diagram. There's our amplifier chassis that appears to be in good shape. We have a nice 4-pole motor here, and the reason they used a larger motor than what you see on conventional phonographs is to give you faster startup time and better speed stability. With talking book records, you really don't need any wow and flutter, and I can tell the motor mounts need to be replaced. They're starting to get a little weak, so we'll do this like we've done every other phonograph that we've worked on. We'll take the motor apart, clean it with this stuff. We'll clean the idler wheel with this stuff. Everything that needs cleaning will be cleaned with a combination of these two products. This area here where you see some dried up grease will be cleaned and re-lubricated with our non-vaginal phonograph lubricant. And this little area back here that you can't see for the wheel will get the same treatment. The spindle bearing will be lubricated with a mixture of this as well as a drop or two of the zoom spout mixed in. This rod that our mechanism travels up and down to select the different speeds will be cleaned, and we'll coat it with a light coating of zoom spout. And the way I like to do that is just put a couple of drops on a Q-tip and coat it that way. Same goes for this idler wheel shaft. We'll take this mechanism apart here, clean it out, and also coat it with a light coating of zoom spout. Take the motor apart, clean it up, re-lubricate the wicking with zoom spout, as well as put a couple of drops of zoom spout on the bearings, and it should be good to go. And the idler wheel is removed by gently prying off the little E-clip, and you'll notice that there'll be some washers on top and on bottom of the wheel. That's to position the wheel correctly with the motor capstan. You want to make sure that you keep track of those washers so you can put them back in the original position. Okay, the idler wheel has been treated with rubber renew, and I've cleaned the center hole of the idler wheel with a Q-tip dipped in 90% rubbing alcohol to get all the old gunk out of it. We'll move our speed selector to the fastest setting, and by the way, even though this machine has unconventional speeds on it. The basic mechanism is the same as your typical 3 or 4 speed caliphone or other manually operated record players. You can use these same steps for servicing those types of units. Now that we have our speed selector in the fastest position, we'll just hold this spring down with one hand and very gently remove the clip with a small screwdriver with the other hand. You want to make sure not to let this spring fly off, because you may never find it again. Okay, the spring and the washer and the clip have now been removed. I've disengaged this tension spring from where it hooks on right here, so now all we need to do is lift this off. There we go, very simple. And then we'll take our small screwdriver and very carefully remove this E-clip, separate these two pieces. There we go, everything's separated, so we'll clean everything thoroughly with the alcohol. And if it's too stubborn, we'll use some contact cleaner. You want to clean these holes out with the Q-tip dipped in alcohol. Okay, we now have these pieces clean. We'll just simply put a couple of drops of zoom spout on the end of a Q-tip and coat this area here, this shaft, and reinstall this and reclip it, and it ought to be good to go. Okay, this piece is reassembled, cleaned, lubricated, and it moves freely as it should. Now the next step is to clean all of this gunk off. In 1971, this was lubricant. Today, it's some kind of hard, crusty, gunk, pasty crap. So we'll need to clean all of that off as best we can. Here we are with all of the crusty lubricant removed. And just a little tip, when you're cleaning these up, flip the lever back and forth, and if you see any cleaner, wipe it up. And you'll have to do that many times, because when you clean one of these, the cleaner has a way of getting under here, and it may take many times of moving this back and forth and wiping the cleaner up to get it all gone. Now that that's done, we'll apply a very light layer of phono lube to this area here, as well as, well, got some junk here, get that out of the way, but we'll apply some more phono lube to these areas here, and also to the bottom of this little rod here, this spring-loaded rod that catches the teeth here to determine the correct position. And we have our points of interest lubricated. I've lubricated this shaft with a light coating of zoom spout, which is zoom spout applied to a Q-tip. We just rub the Q-tip on the shaft. I've applied a light coat of zoom spout to this area here that makes contact with this shifter mechanism. And we'll now slide this piece back on this shaft, put our springs back in place, and this phase of the restoration will be complete. Okay, our speed shifter is moving nicely now, and it's engaging in every position, so that's what we want to happen. Now the next step is to turn the unit upside down, and you'll notice another clip that holds this spindle in place. You'll want to gently pry that clip loose and pull the spindle out, taking care not to lose any washers that might be associated with it. Here's the clip that we'll need to remove. Here's our spindle along with the retainer clip and 2 washers, one at this end, one at this end directly under the clip. And we'll clean this up thoroughly with alcohol, and we'll also clean the center hole out with a Q-tip dipped in alcohol. Okay, we're all cleaned up. Now I like to re-lubricate this particular area with a mix of the non-vaginal phono lube plus a couple of drops of zoom spout mixed in with that, and then it should turn very smoothly at that point. There we are back together, and if you get any excess lubricant that oozes out when you reinstall the spindle, just wipe it up with a paper towel. And as you can see, no more jerky movement. It turns smoothly now. I'll put the plier back on, we'll give it a spin. Remember how noisy and jerky it was at the start of this video? Well, it's not jerky and noisy anymore. That's moving really well now. And while we're at this point, we'll go ahead and clean the inner rim of the platter with rubbing alcohol. Okay, it's now time to take the motor out and clean it and lubricate it. And to get the motor out in this particular unit, you have to remove these three clips. And some models are bolted in, but in any case, make sure not to lose any of the clips or washers or any of the spacers that go along with it. Okay, we have the motor out, but before we take the motor apart, let's go ahead and change out these motor mounts that are starting to fail, and we just manipulate them and push them out the holes. And this is what I use to replace them with. I get them from Antique Electronics Supply. You can also get them from the Voice of Music website. The ones from Antique Electronics Supply are part number P-R407, as you can see. And these are a special cone-shaped mount, specially designed for mounting phonograph motors. And in order to install them, we just push them through the hole and make sure they're in secure. Takes a little patience sometimes, but it's doable. And here they are in place. Now let's take the motor apart. Now before we take the motor apart, it's a good idea to put a mark on both halves of the motor as well as the stator here, to where we can put it all back together like it came out, and pay attention to where the bolts go. You can see this particular one here goes in right by where the AC input leads are, and then our shield ground here connects directly across over here, so we want to take note of that. And then next, once we take note of where everything is, we'll just unbolt everything and it should come apart. Okay, we have the motor apart. Now we'll want to clean it out. This one's not unusually dirty, so I don't think we'll have to do a complete teardown of it. But we'll want to clean the shaft with alcohol and a paper towel. And we'll want to get down in this bottom bearing assembly, clean that out with some alcohol and a Q-tip. Now if this was extremely gummed up, we would have to take this completely apart, which means carefully removing this spring here. And this spring just adds some diameter to the shaft so it will run at the correct speed on 33 RPM. I don't like really removing this spring because it can be a pain in the butt to get off, and it's easy to lose, and it can also be an even bigger pain in the butt to get back on. So if I can clean it up good enough without having to do all that, then that's what we're going to do. And that's what came off of the bottom portion of the motor shaft. Just dirt and gunk that has attracted itself to the motor over the years, and it gets mixed in with the lubricant and it just gums things up. And here's what came out of the bottom bearing just with the first pass. Now when these motors were new, they were advertised as being permanently lubricated over the life of the machine. Now they didn't really expect these machines to last for 45 plus years. They probably figured 7 to 10 years and they would be replaced. But anyway, we want to keep cleaning out the bottom bearing until we get no other junk on the Q-tip. And if this was really gunked up, I would have to just take it apart and just soak both bearings in lacquer thinner. Of course, we wouldn't want to soak the whole field coil assembly. That wouldn't be too good. But we want to soak the bearing assembly in lacquer thinner for a day or two to get all of the gunk out of it. But this motor doesn't really appear to be that bad in comparison to some that I've run into. And this is what I like to re-lubricate with, this Zoom spout oil. Order it off the internet. You can also use the blue 3-in-1 oil for motors, but do not under any circumstances use such products as the red 3-in-1 oil or WD-40 or anything like that. Those products can actually gum up your motor and cause problems down the road. Now if you pay attention to this motor, surrounding the bushing there is a felt wick, and that wick is designed to be oiled, and since these bushings are porous, the oil will be absorbed up into the bushings through the wick. Now what I like to do is saturate the wicks with oil and then I'll put just a drop or two of oil on each contact point here where the shaft contacts the bushing, and then we'll put it all back together. We have everything lubricated and we're almost finished with the reassembly. Right now we just have the bolts just very lightly tightened, but before we tighten them down we want to tap on the sides of the motor with a rubber mallet or butt end of a screwdriver or whatever you happen to have handy, and that's to align the bearings so they won't everything will turn freely. And you'll want to do that procedure, tap on the motor as you tighten the bolts down, just to ensure that everything stays freely. And while you're doing all this, spin the shaft and make sure it's free. If it's binding up, you'll want to tap on it or loosen the bolts and retighten or do whatever is necessary to free things up. Okay, everything's back together and it's running quietly. I'm almost ready to reinstall the idler wheel, but before we do that, we need to clean the motor shaft to remove any deposits of oil that might happen to be on it. Even the slightest amount of oil on your motor shaft, the rubber drive wheel surface, or the inner rim of the turntable can cause all sorts of problems, from a wow and flutter condition to a platter that won't turn at all. So we want to make sure that's clean. We just dip a paper towel in alcohol, activate the motor, and just hold it up against the shaft like that. Clean all the gunk off of it. Okay, I applied a light coating of zoom spout to the idler shaft. We're almost ready to put the top washers and clip in place, but before we do, you always need to look and make sure that the wheel is lining up with the correct position on the motor capstan. Sometimes when you replace the motor mounts, it will alter the position. If the position's incorrect, you'll just have to play around with the washers until you get the position where it needs to be. Alright, let's give it a test run. Power on. 33 RPM, 16 RPM, neutral, and 8 RPM. And we got plenty enough torque. Even on the 8 RPM setting, I'm having to apply quite a bit of pressure to make it stop. Now let's try a 16 RPM record and see what happens. Oh, and one other thing I need to do is replace this rotten foam rubber pad that were on all of these machines from about 1965 until about 1980. That was a really bad design because I've never seen one that was actually intact. Even in the 1980s, when these machines were still in popular service, the pads were disintegrating, and I like to use some type of rubber material like what they use to line the bottoms of kitchen cabinets to keep plates from sliding around. Alright, here's a record.
The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. Published by the Modern Library, Random House. Copyright 1951 by Random House. Copyright 1894 by Stephen Crane. Copyright 1895, 1900, 1923, 1925 by D. Appleton and Company. Recorded on 4 records for the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, 1969. For special distribution as authorized by Act of Congress under Public Law 89-522, and with the kind permission of the publisher.
Okay, here we are with a standard 33 1/3 RPM LP. Now keep in mind, these don't sound the greatest in the world with regular music records because these machines were designed to emphasize the frequency range for voice. And they don't sound terrible, but it's certainly not a hi-fi musical reproducing instrument. And as you can tell, these come up to speed quickly. Like I mentioned before about the 4-pole motor, they start up faster and they hold speed better than a conventional 2-pole motor like what's in most little portable consumer record players. Now, I borrowed a mat off of an old junker record changer that I had around here, but I still need to get a more correct mat so we can play these 9-inch flexible disc records. They really need something that has some grip to it that'll keep the record from slipping on the turntable. And yes, the date is, you're seeing the date correctly on here, November the 13th, 2000. This was almost at the end of the line for newly produced talking book magazines and from the Library of Congress. In January 2001, they switched everything over to cassette. Actually, I think the way it worked was, and I think the last actual talking book record was in '94, but they kept the talking magazines on these 8 RPM flexible disc until the end of 2000, and then in January 2001, everything was switched to 4-track, 15/16 inches per second cassettes, and that format stayed around until a few years ago when everything was converted to digital cartridges. I think there's still some older stuff being issued on cassette, but there hasn't been any new material pressed on cassette or recorded on cassette. Pressed would be for a record, but anyway, there hasn't been anything on cassette in several years. See how this does. I know it's not going to do well.
Beginning in January.
Yeah, that's slipping like crazy. Okay, now that we have our audiophile grade record weight in place, let's try that one more time.
Here. Beginning in January 2001, this magazine will be produced on audio cassette and will no longer be available on flexible disc. You will automatically receive the cassette edition beginning in January. If you do not currently have a cassette player, contact your library. A complete list of NLS recorded magazines is provided in the latest issue of Talking Book Topics. Side 1, U.S. News and World Report, November 13th, 2000. Copyright 2000 by U.S. News and World Report, Incorporated. Read by Jake Williams, Bill Wallace, Eric Sandbold, and Martha Harmon Pardee. This magazine contains 80 pages on 4 sides and was originally produced for the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, Library of Congress. You will not be contacted by the producer.
Okay, well, other than replacing the turntable mat and cleaning it up, this thing's about ready to go. So, thank you for watching, and more to come later.
6 to 8 weeks for address change. Send both old and new addresses. Table of Contents. Side 1. Letters, page 4. Washington Whispers, page 13. Vital Statistics, page 16. People, page 18. John Leo. On Society, page...
Bush intends to take about 1/6 of Social Security revenue and put it into a system of private investment accounts. But this will rob the system of $1.2 trillion by 2010, advancing the date of its bankruptcy, which would require vast transfusions of general revenue. This would mean a return to deficit spending, because Bush will have squandered the surplus on across-the-board tax cuts. He has promised $1.2 trillion in Social Security revenue. Gore exaggerates, and Bush is dumb, and then endlessly plays up incidents that confirm these diagnoses, obscuring the issues in the process. The result is a referendum on the candidates' personalities. Americans need to remember that they are voting for policies that will endure well beyond the next president's time in office, whatever his personality.
End of U.S. News and World Report. Read by Jake Williams, Bill Wallace, Eric Sandvold, and Martha Harmon Pardee, in the studios of Talking Book Publishers, Incorporated, a supporting organization to the American Foundation for the Blind, for the Library of Congress, November 2000. Published by U.S. News and World Report, Incorporated, 450 West 33rd Street, 11th floor, New York, New York, 10001. Further reproduction or distribution in other than a specialized format is prohibited. If you experienced any difficulty with this recording, please specify the problem on a postcard or letter addressed to Materials Development Division, National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, Washington, D.C., 20542.
And here's another one that we'll be repairing in the near future. I actually picked this up at the flea market the other day. This is a model AD6, and from best I can tell, it's from 1963. It started out in life as a 2-speed model, 16 and 33 RPM, but when the 8 RPM records started coming on the scene in the late 60s, a lot of these older 2-speed machines were fitted with 3-speed motors to accommodate the new 8 RPM records, and this machine here underwent such a conversion. According to the date code on the motor, it's late 1966, so this conversion was probably done in 1967 or later. Have it plugged in and turned on just to see what will happen, and nobody's home. We're not getting any amplifier action or motor action or nothing. There's not even any current draw on the meter over here, so something is definitely wrong. Obviously an open in the primary somewhere. It could very well be that this circuit breaker is bad. In fact, it's stuck down in here and won't do anything, so I won't be a bit surprised if that's what the problem is. But we'll hold off on this one for another day.